Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you are joining for the first time, welcome to. And somebody needs to mute, I guess. Nirav, can you please mute? Okay. Mute, I guess. Nirav, can you please mute?
Yep.
All right, guys, thank you so much once again for joining in. Sorry for the technical trouble there. And if you're joining for the first time, this is part of our digital transformation series for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to digital transformation, and we always have an expert panel here. So for today, we are going to be discussing the topic called document management. And now you might be wondering, okay, what the hell is document management? How difficult could that be? Just get a document, dump it somewhere, be done with it, right? But you will realize in today's panel how difficult that could be and the kind of processes it might drive. So before we jump into that, we are going to start with everybody's intros. I am going to start with my intro. If you don't know me, I am Sam Gupta, your host and principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. On that note, I am going to move to Chris for his intro.
Thanks, Sam. Chris Gherardini, owner and CEO of Turnkey Technologies, 28-year-old practice. We're focused on implementing Microsoft Dynamics 365 ERP solutions. So great topic. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much for being here, Chris. Dave, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sam. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Crysler, and I own an operations consulting business working with leaders in the manufacturing and distribution spaces, helping them to create systems that free them to drive growth and operate with excellence. And I come to you with more than 20 years of operational leadership roles, dealing with ERP and document management. So excited to be here.
This is going to be so much fun. Thank you so much for being here, Dave. Mark, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Keynes. I'm the president of BlueLink ERP, which is celebrating our 31st year in business. And so a lot of experience in working with ERP, typically with small to medium-sized owner-managed companies in the product space, distributors, etc. And also have taken a direction towards helping get rid of paper. So I guess that's part of what we're talking about with document management, although it's only a small part of it. So I'm really excited to learn as well as share whatever I've learned along the way.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Mark. And if you're in the audience and joining for the first time, make sure you guys post your questions and comments. We typically try to cover them during the show. And if we run out of time, then we'll make sure that you receive your answers. On that note, I am going to start with the first question with Chris. So, Chris, when we think of document management, and I don't know how serious this needs to be, maybe you can layer in with different industries. Obviously, in manufacturing, when I look at the document management, that's tricky because everything is document management. The most surprising part that I find in manufacturing, okay, with the people who don't necessarily understand what is an ERP versus what is not an ERP, sometimes for them, BOM could be a document, okay? And then you can have a real fun with that. So, Chris, obviously, I want to start with you, but Nirav is here, and we'll see if he's able to introduce himself, and then I'll come back to you with the question if you don't mind. Nirav, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. Hello, technical difficulty, Sam. Nirav Shah, I'm CEO of AdSearch ERP, Acumatica partner, and I'm excited to be on the show and discuss and talk about document capture. Document capture is getting more and more important, and every implementation, it seems like now, customers have this requirement where they need to take all their documents, put it in the right places in the ERP, and be able to go ahead and retrieve that back and use it real time. Not just as a link, but be able to weave that back into the process intelligently. So it's a very hot topic. Customers see the value of all sorts of documents coming in from all these different places. You're talking about Outlook, you're talking about CAD systems, you're talking about vendors and customers and all these different places, different ways as documents are coming over. So it's a topic that definitely needs more attention. So we could inform the users and the viewers of this podcast on how what the best practices are and then the do's and don'ts of document capture when it comes to ERP systems.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Nirav. Chris, so coming back to you with the question, do you want to start?
Sure. So as you look at, and I think it's interesting you to document capture, I think that's one aspect of document management. But the term document management, Mark, I heard you say, does that mean paperless? But I think, paperless is certainly as a goal is to cut less trees. But if you think about the concept of it, and it has a very big scope. And I think you mentioned manufacturing, and in manufacturing context, right, engineering drawings, where are they, and who's got the latest drawing, and what's the revision? And I think as you understand the complexities by space within the business, there's different requirements. And again, it deals with policies, retention policies, security policies. Can somebody download it? Can they look at it? Can they copy and paste? Wow. And again, we're talking about electronic documents. So sure, we're not talking about paper necessarily, but Nirav will probably comment on how do we get the paper into the system. But if we think about scope, and let's just talk about engineering for a second, and I work with defense contractors and aviation, and documents are the grail, and CAD, PLM, ERP, and okay, well, who's got the latest copy? And the best world is where they're integrated, and you've always got the latest copies of all the documents, the right revisions for engineering. And again, it helps you manage engineering change management. And they have an inefficient document management strategy around complex engineering. It's you throw manual people at it as you try to manage even engineering change. But the simple one everybody thinks about when they think document management is AP automation. Think, hey, I want to scan my invoice and workflow it and have it integrate and then pay it. So that's the most basic one that everybody thinks about first is AP invoices. And that's great because now we can route them around electronically. And hey, with remote work, right? Everybody needed to get more electronic, convert the paper to electronic so we can move it and we're not moving physical paper. Remember years ago, we had people that FedExed multiple locations. They FedExes every day back and forth between their offices. Wow, that's all gone. FedEx is losing revenue. But again, we go back to vendor management in the AP process, and you think about a W-9. Hey, where am I going to keep the W-9? Let's attach it where it belongs. We talked about engineering data, product data lives along the product side, the engineering side, customer data. Sales tax exemption certificates. Who knows? What else do you attach by customers? There's a lot of different information to manage. And then human capital. Wow, now we got the people side of the business. And a lot of these systems, they start with AP automation and let's scan invoices, but there's a broader impact. And I think usability is a big key. Search, SEO, how do I find stuff? But, one of the big things I'll flag out here as you think about just, before you load a ton of stuff up is usability, portability. What's portability mean? What migration? I've got a deal right now where the customers relied heavily on attachments. Guess what? Attachments don't migrate. Wow, that's a nightmare for a customer upgrading from an ERP system to another. So I think, one of the key things is you make this investment in electronically, documentation is usability and where's it go from here? What if you fire the partner? How do you get it out of there? Where's it go? How easy is that process? Because there's a lot of important stuff there. But again, we can continue to talk about that. But by function, by industry, there's going to be different types of policies and requirements, and certainly advantages to not being electronic or not being paper based. But good start.
Yeah, very good start indeed. In fact, I mean, I'm simply going to build up on whatever you just said, and I'm also going to go back to my own commentary in terms of sort of drawing the line between what is a document versus what is not a document. Okay, and sometimes I'm just blown away when I'm talking to these smaller ERP vendors, and if I'm asking a question, okay, how do you implement a revision or a BOM, inside your system, and they're going to say, okay, this is where you upload the BOM. So you don't really have sort of the workflow incorporated in the system.
And it's imperative. And those systems are not as efficient and people throw labor at them. Again, I've had some of these defense contractors that don't want to integrate their CAD with their ERP and respectfully around the document sharing. I mean, you always got the latest revisions no matter where you're working. You start here, it's there. But to manage the change management processes and complex engineering, you can't do it. And moreover, you've got compliance requirements for certifications. And if you're selling into government defense contracting agencies, think about compliance requirements for auditability of those documents, right? Trace. And now we get into, confidential, undisclosed information. We're talking about document policies and security. So it can be a rabbit hole as you think about by industry, and certainly in the defense and the aerospace and the complex manufacturing. Again, if you're building stuff that's going on the space shuttle, think about the auditability of that. And it goes all the way back to receiving processes. Think about capturing, and they're right. We've got a receiving and we've got details that come in with the product. From the earliest point in the process, there's that need to electronically have that information travel so it's accessible from anywhere, right? We don't have to go look. We don't have to go to filing cabinets. It's hard for people to imagine, 10 years ago. And there's a lot of companies probably left go, I still go to the filing cabinet. So you need to bring in this on-premise document destruction company at some point after you get everything where you can move it around electronically. But that's a future state for a lot of organizations still. I think a lot of people are still primitive.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Dave, I'm coming to you. And, when I think of document management, typically in my mind, that's a process inside your organization. And you typically want to define how and what are going to be documents that you want to manage as part of your document management process. When I was thinking about this topic, I wasn't thinking of the document capture, to be honest, okay? Because, in my mind, when I think of document capture, sure, can you store invoices? Yes, you can. But does it have any sort of implications on your workflow, of your manufacturing process? Probably not. Do you need to store invoice? Yes, you need to store so that you can refer back to it. But it does not have as much implication as you are going to have with the CAD drawing. So, for example, let's say if you mess up with your revision, okay, you are probably going to see some implications in your production. Invoices, once you get paid, that's it, done, right? So go ahead and talk about in your mind, what is document management and what kind of processes that you have seen with respect to this business process.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think you did a nice job of kind of laying it out there. And Chris obviously came out of the gates firing today, which I always appreciate. I mean, it really, to me, highlights the complexity from a process perspective, right? Because it is, you could take a look at it from the industry perspective. Obviously, it's going to be business specific, kind of use case specific. And to your point, in terms of how that lays out into process, with any of the panels that we really talk about, from my standpoint, it always comes back to that because, without that clear understanding of process, how it's going to be utilized, how you need to access it, who needs to access it, at what point, without that clear understanding, kind of the rest of it doesn't matter. So to elaborate on that and to that point, and kind of tack on to some of what Chris was saying, one of the things that as the, this has kind of come into existence, I would say, or more widely accepted, 5 years ago, we weren't talking about nearly as much remote work as we are today, and how that ultimately impacts this document management aspect of, work. It also touches on the security elements of that. Who has access? How do they get that access? Is it, through, remote desktop? Is it, where does that stuff live? Right. All of that is another consideration with this. The other thing I would say is, Chris mentioned some of the more complex manufacturing and kind of, more high profile types of industries, but I've seen similar challenges in, a lot less complex and a lot less high profile manufacturing facilities. I come from a background of print manufacturing, and, this was a challenge for a lot of those facilities as well, especially when you talk about that, CAD system, how that interacted from an engineering standpoint, where we had to get certain pieces manufactured using those CAD drawings, and then how that information got relayed internally. And typically what I would see time and time again is you'd have multiple revisions and or siloed systems that were sitting out there. So one department, one group of people may have access to one set of systems, and then it was another, kind of responsibility, part of the process for somebody else to update that. And so as you've got all of those silos sitting around, that's a whole nother complexity to add into the process conversation of how do you manage those documents. And that doesn't, again, back to your point, it doesn't really touch on the kind of mechanics of getting it from one spot to the other, or how we're going to do that, or why we need access to those things. The searchability feature of it, kind of all of that part is really a whole separate conversation if you can't dive in and understand what that business use case is, what that business process needs to be, and how that flow ultimately impacts your customer and internal operations.
Yeah, could not agree more. Great points and insight. So I'm again simply going to build on that and probably going to tell you one story from my experience, and then maybe I don't know if you're going to have any sort of commentary or stories that you might be able to provide further. When you talk about the different system scenario, as you mentioned, a lot of people think that the ERP documentation management is going to be probably tricky to work with. And in general, depending upon the system, some systems do it really well. Some systems are extremely tricky. Okay. So in some systems, what is going to happen is as soon as you generate your physical invoice, you are going to send either through email or print or whatever you are trying to do with the invoice. And the same invoice instance, a physical copy is going to be available with your transaction that you can retrieve at any point of time. Okay, the legacy systems, what they are going to do is they are not going to have this process as smooth. So what is going to happen is, you probably need to send the invoice, get the copy of that from your probably machine, dump it into your transaction. Sure, you can probably figure out a way of automating that as well. But when you are going to be going to have to retrieve that, it becomes very tricky process overall to manage that. And the story that I was going to tell you related to the different systems when you're jumping around in different systems. So you would think that, what, I can get my Dropbox, OneDrive, whatever, and I can manage my document using that. But when you think about your Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, or when you have to share the access, okay, when you are going to be transferring your access control list to your other systems, good luck with that. We are going to have it in different systems. So I don't know, Dave, whatever commentary or story that you might be able to offer.
Yeah, I mean, just again, trying to build off of things here. I mean, one consideration to that scenario, which many people would look to, Dropbox or something like that as that, document repository. Let's just eliminate the search, aspect of that. What about just uploads, right? Like, what kind of strain is that going to have, on your overall architecture? It's stuff like that people don't even consider. The security aspect of it, again, how does that data get backed up? I dial it all the way back down to, all of those things are kind of nice to have. And whether it lives in your ERP, whether it is a siloed system, that's kind of all nice to have. But at the end of the day, if you haven't made a business use case for it from a process perspective, in my opinion, you're kind of wasting your time and resources on it. Because you've not outlined what the real advantage is going to be in the long run, whether that's, internal efficiency from a process standpoint, or that is, customer facing, and there is some functionality of that that ends up being customer facing. So I think you're far and away best to start there and build upon it, because if you are kind of left to what most people would say, like, I want to have everything available at all times, no paper anywhere, you could be, kind of overcommitting resources for, not a lot of return there.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Dave. So Mark, I am coming to you, and the question, and I'm simply going to build up based on whatever we have discussed so far, Chris, Dave. So basically, when you talk about the security access control list, you are going to be overly worried about these things in the digital world. In the physical world, how are you going to implement that security? Because you could have papers that could be lying anywhere on your shop floor. So in your industry, especially when you're talking about pharma, obviously these things could be extremely critical. When you have BSCSA compliance, that okay, you might be working on a specific recipe or packaging that you're not supposed to be misplacing, or not having enough security around that. So I don't know. I mean, see, obviously the document management processes in your industry are probably going to be far more complicated overall from the access control list perspective, as well as from the management perspective. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, good points. And I mean, good points, everybody. And I'm glad that we've kind of progressed from, just talking about document capture and going paperless, which probably I see as the genesis of tech people talking about document management, but it's obviously a lot bigger. And, what is a document? So I'll come back to the pharmaceutical thing. But I mean, one of the things that I always think about when you talk about security, as soon as you mention security, where my mind went was checks, right? I mean, can't tell you how many times, I'm sure it's all with all of you, you walked into a company and just seen blank checks lying around. Like, that's like literally, there may as well be a sign saying fraud happened here, So, and of course, like, if you think about how we've managed checks, we've gone from like several years ago, someone wanted to pay you by check, that sign a check, stick it in the mail. You'd eventually receive it in the mail, fill out a deposit slip, send someone down to the bank to deposit it. Now somebody, if they still want to pay you by check, which I'm not sure why anyone does anymore, but people do, they can cut the check, take a photo of it, text you the photo, and you can e-deposit it right off your phone. But now just think about the security implications of what I just said. Just think about how many holes there are in the security there. So nobody thinks about that. Nobody thinks about that. And I mean, I've seen, sure we all have, I've seen checks for like, $4 or $5 million being literally texted over a plain old phone text. So very little security there. Maybe that makes it worse than just leaving checks lying around an office. But I mean, security is a fairly important part of document management, whether it's a paper document or an electronic document, in a lot of industries. And I mean, one of the industries that we play a lot in is the pharmaceutical distribution industry. And you're absolutely right, Sam, there are all kinds of requirements around not only security and sanctity and accuracy of documents, but timing of documents as well. So one of the things that I'm very sort of passionate about, only, I see your comment there, Dave, interesting. Fair enough. But one of the things that is also like a part in my mind of document management, and it ties in with security and with getting your processes, to Dave's points, down pat, is the ability or the need in my mind to automate things. So for example, you might be a pharmaceutical distributor and you've got a large order that's ready to ship out to like a large medical facility, but you require a certificate from the DEA. And it could be hopefully it's a digital, if you're using our software, it's a digital certificate. It may still be a paper-based certificate that you download off a portal, but either way, till that certificate arrives and exists, you cannot ship the shipment. So what you don't want is the document arrives, but nobody's aware that it arrives, and therefore the shipment sits there for another 2 days until somebody checks their digital inbox or whatever it is. So that's a really good case in my mind for a big part of document management, in addition to security and digitization and workflow management, which are all important things to be able to throw in, and I guess it is part of workflow management, but to throw in the ability to automate processes based on the state of a document. Another thing, though, that I'll throw out as well, and Sam, you asked this early on, is in manufacturing for sure, and definitely in pharmaceutical, there is definitely a very, very broad gray line between what is a document and what is data. In the pharmaceutical industry, it's changing under DSCSA.
Yeah.
Something that was purely a document 7 or 8 years ago, which was the drug pedigree, it was always a document. As of November next year, it's not a document at all. It's only data under the new EPCIS regulations. So, but the concerns around managing this data remain the same. You've got to worry about the accuracy of the data, the timeliness, the ease of access of the data. So you could tie that right back to what we started off with, where Chris said right at the beginning, that the most common thing that people think about with document management is the AP case, the accounts payable case. Same thing. Maybe we're a little bit less concerned about security around an invoice that came in from a supplier. I don't know if that's right, but maybe we are. But we're just as concerned about timeliness, accuracy, automation where possible, having people, reducing the amount of time and effort that people spend processing these things. So in my space with distribution, an invoice comes in, and let's say it comes in as an email by PDF, or it's downloaded off a portal, or somebody scans a paper invoice, doesn't really matter. So do we really want human beings to have to A, go and search for that invoice, B, do their 3MA match against your packing slip and your receiving information, and C, send it through the necessary approval process for entry into your AP system, and then subsequently through all the necessary approval processes for paying the supplier? Or do we want to try and automate that process with a coherent automated system? To me, that's like where some of the bang for your buck is for investing time, effort, and money in document management.
Yeah, so some very interesting layer there. The best point that I like in your commentary is going to be the distinction between data and document. And I don't know how many people really think in that direction, to be honest. I mean, the way I would like to do this is when I am personally doing any sort of ERP implementation, probably you want to call out every single business object, whether this is going to be a data or is it going to be a document, then you'll have real clarity. I'll give you one more story. And, again, when you talk about different ERP systems, the way they treat these things is going to be very different. For example, let's say if you talk about an ERP system, okay, show me your quality management module. And they're going to say, you know what, I have these attributes and, you can upload your quality management document here. You can upload your test cases, whatever you want, you can upload. But you don't really have those workflows set up, and you need to have the workflow. And I don't know if workflow is also going to be a term that companies should be using. What is going to be a workflow? What is going to be a data? And what is going to be a document? And that is probably just a physical document that does not really have any sort of implications on your processes. So again, I mean, Mark, I don't know if you're going to have any sort of build up there based on my commentary. Any other thoughts by any chance?
Not really. I mean, the only thing that sort of does spring to mind is that there are certain things that are very obviously documents or document centric, and I think certainly with a lot of the kind of companies that I deal with, which are maybe the somewhat smaller, 50 to 100 employee type companies, in the wholesale distribution space, that's often one of the biggest clues in terms of improving efficiency. Like, what about expense reimbursement claims, guys? Anybody seen cumbersome, very paper-based, labor-intensive salespeople expense reimbursements or traveling technician expense reimbursements? But most of those expenses, not all, but most of those are document-based. You've got a receipt from the restaurant, you've got a hotel bill, which again, it may be paper, it may be electronically emailed to you, but that's clearly a document until you convert it into data anyway. It's a document. So that's an area where you could, with a combination of the appropriate document management processes, well thought out, well structured, the tools to automate them, and the tried and tested workflows, you can get to where, like, again, great solution, and we use it ourselves. Somebody gets a hotel bill or a restaurant bill, and they're gonna basically claim it. They take out their phone, they use a scanning tool to scan it. They notate one or two things on the scan, click a button, it automatically gets into the ERP system. It automatically goes onto their account as a reimbursable expense awaiting approval. There's an electronic approvals. The whole thing goes sort of seamlessly. You cut people out, you cut time out, you cut cycles out, but that is very, very document centric. But yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of more external business processes where there's a total disconnect, or not a disconnect, there's a total gray line between data and with documents. And let's also not forget about external documents that you're sending out. That's another side of it. You have again, in a lot of industries, again, pharmaceuticals, one of them, but a lot of regulated industries, when you sell product A to customer B, because it is product A and because customer B is a particular type of customer, maybe in the military or maybe government, with that product, you have to send a certificate of authenticity or some sort of a document that has to be generated. Well, for this customer, you can send that electronically, so you're just transmitting data. But for this other customer who doesn't have the ability to receive it via EDI, you're actually creating a document and sending a document. So now what you're doing is you're taking data and turning it into a document. But hopefully you're doing it automatically without somebody manually going and handling the document.
Okay, amazing insights here. Thank you so much, Mark, for those. So Nirav, I'm coming to you. And do you want to talk about your experience in terms of what you have seen overall from the document management perspective, where people are likely to mix the data document as well as probably external documents, the new layer that Mark brought in?
Yeah, no, I think everyone has some really good points here. Our firm does a lot of work in the make to order space in manufacturing, also does some work in the distribution side. Make to order, that's a hard line, right? That is tough for someone to understand whether that's going to be data or that's going to be document. Everything's customer design. It's coming in, it's being assigned to a project, being associated to maybe an invoice, all of these external communications that they want to bring back into the project in the ERP system, right? So there, it's critical. A lot of companies want everything in there, everything under the sun. Let's put everything, all our communication in there. Well, we could, but what's actually going to add value, right? What's going to add value in this document management process? What we're adding here at the end of the day, what analysis are you doing with that type of information, right? What could be fed into OCR, directly back into the system versus attachments that you could reference if there's a dispute, if there's any question on any type of invoicing, any type of drawings, things like this, right? Going one step further, you're looking at production, right? But you have engineering that's doing all these bill of materials, they're using a CAD system, then they're saving these drawings in a third-party system. I had a customer that, probably 150,000 square feet facility. Every single one of their production orders before being released, they'd have to go run to engineering, get a print of the drawing, come back, and then start the production order with the traveler. Well, wasn't efficient time. So what we did was created an intelligent retrieval system. So we hooked in URLs, basically addresses of part of the address was static, part of it was variable, right? So every time they went and created a production order and was printing a traveler, well, that process went and basically plugged in the item number of the drawing and needed to go and retrieve and bring that back and essentially not even save it in ERP, but pass through it, either print it or show it right there on the screen for them, right? Saves all that back and forth for that particular client, essentially, right? So they don't have to go run to engineering and get the latest drawing, because the latest drawing would automatically print when they're ready to execute the production order, when they're printing the traveler. So they would get that customer-specific drawing printed right away, right? That was a huge cost savings for them to be able to go and retrieve that drawing, essentially. So that document management from a make-to-order standpoint is critical, but we need to understand, right, what is going to add value in getting the data, storing the data in the ERP, right? Other than, then the data could sit outside the ERP. Another thing I want to touch on is more and more what we don't realize, and what customers should probably start thinking about with document management, is the utilization of customer vendor portals. That in itself could also be used as a document kind of replacement in a sense, right? Because you could navigate, you could take orders, send invoices all electronically, right? You're not really, passing anything, you're not sending anything, but it's all in a medium platform there. These portals, same thing on the vendor side. Vendors could send invoices, you could go and send purchase orders, right? That streamlined communication instead of all of it having to pass through email, essentially. So that's also a way of, looking at document management, but taking that to next step further, utilizing tools around that, right? Electronic data that you could use that will generate these kind of what I call supporting documents for customer vendor, right? Another good one that we touched on was expense reporting, right? Being able to be out in the field, take a picture of an expense report that will then OCR it essentially right there into the ERP system to take in that particular expense and log the expenses in AP, so you could pay the proper employee, with the enough background information that you need for that. So, if you look at all around, you look at the whole ERP system, there's documents that are going to need to be managed, right? We have to bring in. That's either going to be, captured, there's going to be scanned, there might be a picture from Outlook, drag and drop functionality. It's all there. Mark talked about compliance regulations. We talked about quality conformance type of examples, right? And that's all important that it gets generated, gets captured properly, because the ERP system at the end of the day is going to be your audit trail, right? Somebody may leave the company. Well, now you have to go through their email, right? Instead of doing that, let's have a process in place where if it's an important auditable document for us, let's get that hooked into the system, right? Either by way of data, we OCR that into the system, or we link it and attach it, because that's, the way we want to go. But there has to be a strategy. It can't just be, we want to turn on document management and now we're going to start doing everything under the sun. That requires us to go paperless, right? Yeah, we want to be 80% paperless, but what's going to add the most value in your ERP system as you're going to go ahead and embark in this strategy to go, with all these documents coming in from every direction, in the business.
Yeah, so some very interesting layers there. And I am going to touch on one point that you mentioned that is very, very, very interesting. And typically, a lot of people struggle with it. So when people, especially the companies that are trying the ERP for the first time, for them, it's going to be ERP or no ERP. Meaning, ERP meaning I want to automate everything. I don't want to do any work whatsoever. Okay, so their goal is going to be, for example, let's say if you talk about email, right? So email, obviously you have the sort of the isolated mailboxes And now what you're trying to do is, if everything is going to be inside ERP, obviously your life is going to be easy. If somebody leaves, and you don't have to go to their mailbox, retrieve every single document, and then figure out, okay, what happened there, right? If you keep everything in ERP, it's easy. Now, let's look at the perspective of a person who's sort of trying it for the first time. They want to automate everything, getting the taste of automation for the first time. So for them, it's going to be, okay, I'm going to use this fancy add-on in my Outlook. Okay, I don't want to go to my ERP. Everything that I want to do is my Microsoft Outlook add-in. Sure, a lot of ERP systems are going to provide that, but the amount of data that it is going to dump inside your ERP system, it's going to be so clunky, so bloated. You are going to get the whole mail object, because for the add-ons to work, and you are going to corrupt the whole database of the ERP system. Going back to Chris's comments about the upgrade, he mentioned the attachments you cannot migrate. Okay, good luck in migrating the technical data of that add-on. It's going to be a nightmare. So I don't know, Nirav, based on my commentary and these stories, if you have anything you can offer, please.
Yeah, it comes down to strategy, right? What are we storing? Why do we want to store it? What is the business reason behind it? What value are we going to get down the road, right? How are we going to query the database, right? And not everything, right? ERP operational, and then we have CRM, okay? Think about what goes into a CRM versus ERP, right? There's a distinction there, right? Not everything has to go into the ERP, right? There's some information that has to live in the CRM essentially. So, instead of it making it all clunky, putting everything into a customer record when that customer already exists in the CRM, and you have people contact, you're capturing leads, you're capturing interactions, capturing all these things already. Keep some of that stuff in there, right? Because that's a different type of audience that's going to be needing that information, that needs that at certain points in their day-to-day activity. Versus ERP, operational, we need this for maybe a financial audit. We need this for, a customer complaint. We need this for engineering before they start production, right? So on and so forth. There's different type of documents, and we have to have a clear strategy on where these documents are going to sit. They can't sit all in the same place, right? We want to make sure that the strategy is clear and communicated throughout the organization.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Nirav, for that. So, Chris, coming over to you. Any comments, stories?
Sure. It's funny, Mark. I'm writing down some things and you're saying them. I'm like, how do you see my notepad here? But the conversation about documents into data and then data into documents. It's very interesting perspective because, we go back to usability and back to that point. And, Nirav said OCR, and again, ERP, CRM, OCR, everybody's watching. What is OCR? Optical character. So that is where technology can read a document and turn it into data fields and eventually integrate that data into a process. And I think as we think about that, it's very interesting. And I have a client that think about EDI. They're getting all their invoices. There's no documents. Think about the anxiety those folk have. And so they wanted, we have a client that brings it in. They wanted actually, can we fabricate documents from EDI data so we have something that feels like an invoice? Okay. And it's still electronic. They didn't print them, but very interesting. And that's a data into a document, but that's our life, right? We take transactional data, we create documents. Managing those documents, the content, the accuracy is part of document management. Again, can I reproduce a document? Well, that's interesting because everybody, I need copies of my checks. Well, why? Can you see it on screen? Can I see it electronically, digitally? Okay, don't get. So I think that's part of what you have to hear as well as you think about, how do I build my policies? How do I build processes? Am I consuming the data electronically? Meaning, do I have a tool that can take these documents and scrape them? Not all documents you need to scrape, right? Engineering data documents are created from very low level technical data, right? When we're still managing that technical data, regenerating the documents from that data. It's not the reverse process. But so just making that kind of comment. And I think as you look at just, and the other comment about time and expense. Yeah, we actually, and this is a different, we added an app. There's an app that lives on Dynamics. And so we rolled it out. They basically take a picture of the receipt, throw it away. So great. And so what are we doing there? Well, we're simplifying process. We're not trying to hang on to paper and move paper around. I think another thing that I'll come back to is we think about clutter. We go back to policies. We go back to weight, and attachments, right? And where am I storing this and how much am I storing and how much is that costing? So I think there still needs to be an understanding of impact. And as you say, well, let's keep everything. Okay, well, that's the extreme situation versus just keeping your AP invoices. So I think organizationally, you really need to, as you study business processes, you look at where is it so helpful for people just to be able to see it right there. I don't have to go anywhere. I can get that. I can see that data in seconds, whether it's data, whether it's a document that I'm reading. But I think that's an important part of the process, because you still need to determine, okay, well, how much is storage going to be? I got 20 years. Hey, what about all my attachments? Well, we're not going to try to get 20 years worth. That's for sure. But again, you go back to computations. And again, most people still think storage is free, but it still comes back to efficiency. And again, you go back to search. And if the documents are not translated into data, right? Once it's data, we can get at every little granule of it. But if they're stored as documents, and most AP automation tools let you tag a document with metadata. So what metadata is, just to explain that, is they're just additional attributes, meaning, right, I'm going to put search criteria or category. Oh, maybe there's a department code that's part of the metadata. Maybe the GL account is part of the metadata. Maybe it knows the vendor number, it knows the invoice number, but if those examples where, can I see all the invoices for this department for this month? There's an example of being able to search just pure PDF type documents, because they add a little bit to them. That data may be in your ERP system, right? We took the document, translated into transactional data. It's in there. But if we want to find an image of the document, and again, most ERP systems, you get to the transaction, the document's right there next to the transaction. So we've been understanding how does it place them? Where does it store them? What's the accessibility look like? There was another mention about outbound flow of documents, and that's a huge detail, meaning item certification. Hey, I sold you this, and when I ship it, the sales order, I need a supplemental document that's an item certification document. Well, again, to attach and manage those documents at the product level, have them automatically flow out the door when you do a sales transaction. It could be an example on a purchase order as well, where you've got a purchase contract that's maintained somewhere in the system, and the vendor, you need to send a copy of that contract out with the purchase order. Okay, again, the awkwardness of, I got to get a PO and I got to find the paper, put them together, scan them back in, email them. Again, there's systems that will automate that for you. And I think, again, you're architecting business process. Where do I need the document? Where do I capture it? How do I capture it? How do I influence to send it to me in a better form that's easier for me to capture, process? Lots of hands off, right? Retention policies. But anyway, I can keep going.
So some very interesting layers here, and I'm probably going to have a story there, okay, for you, Chris, and you're going to love this, okay? So since you are talking about all of this clutter, as well as the reproduction of the documents, right? So I was at a facility ERP implementation, and I was able to see that they probably have 2 warehouses. And I'm, as ERP consultant, you need to know how many sites do you have, how many warehouses do you have, what is happening with each of the warehouses, what is the correlation between warehouses. And I'm asking all of these questions, and the owner is responding that, okay, we have just 1 warehouse. Sir, I can see 2 warehouses in your facility. What's going on in the second one? No. Don't worry about that. I got 1. Okay. I'm like, come on, I can see 2 here. Okay. You need to tell me what is that. And then we figured out, okay, after I think I had discussion with the employees, and then they told me that the second warehouse, it is supposed to be the most confidential for the company. That's where he stores all of his documents for the last 23 years. Everything super stacked, bins and labels. A warehouse is not going to be as managed as the document repository. Nobody touches that. Okay.
And then there was a flood or a fire, and guess what? Oops. Yeah. Think about if you're in the west coast of Florida right now and you had your documents in your garage, you got a problem.
Exactly. But
It's a risk.
Cybersecurity is far bigger risk, right, Chris?
It's if you're old school, you got to get over it, and everybody else just expects it. Nobody wants paper. Nobody wants to touch things. They all expect to be able to click and see what's it look like. Show it to me. So it's a very interesting story, though. But you're right. And you go back to what do you do with those? Again, there are tools out there where you decide what's valuable, you tag them, and you scan them into your systems. And these systems will manage transactional data, and they'll also let you create storage mechanisms, electronic filing cabinets to get it all out of paper and move it up into a cloud storage where there's redundancy, which means it's not going to get wet, it's not going to burn. You'll never lose it. And I think that's part of this risk mitigation as you look at document management policies. It's part of it. So it's a great story, Sam.
Okay, amazing insight and story. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So Dave, I'm coming to you. Comments over comments, any stories?
Yeah, there's so much to pick from. So I'll kind of tack on to a little bit of what Chris was just saying, in terms of, having the ability to have that stuff kind of live forever, which is great in a lot of sense. But it can also lead to, kind of additional clutter, just in the cloud or living somewhere else. And there is a real cost to that at some point, right? So depending on the system that you choose, depending on if you're working with on-prem servers and you have some IT infrastructure that maybe you're doing some of your own document management, and or you are utilizing whether it's an ERP, a CRM, what have you, to do that, and it does live in the cloud. I mean, there are considerations to kind of each different scenario, and again, I dial it back to what are the business process behind it, and and everybody is touching on that. So hopefully the takeaway is for anybody that's listening to this is to really dial into that, because you can go to the extreme and never see another paper trail anywhere to be found. But there is a cost associated with that. There are resources that get allocated because of that. So making sure that you understand what that looks like. And the other thing I would say, kind of tacking out to what Nirav was saying with his example in with the engineering schematics kind of being readily available and circumventing the process of having to go and get physical copies and those types of things. One thing I would add to that is oftentimes when I'm looking at those types of scenarios from a process standpoint, people don't always understand what the bounds of those are. And so what I mean is that, is there ever a situation where a revision overlaps a version, right? And so that's a real consideration. Again, back to understanding where your processes live and, what the boundaries of each one of those are. So as you're making these decisions about, how do we automate, how do we access information, how do we make it easier for people to do the work that they need to do, that all of those, intricacies get factored into the, into that process map, and that decision-making tree. So, yeah, in terms of stories, I've kind of seen things that span the gamut, where you go into an organization and it's that, we want to be paperless, and you start to dial into, well, why, what access do we need? What are you really going to be doing with this down the road? And more times than not, it is more of a, I think you made the point, it's kind of an all or nothing, right? There is no in between. And the reality of it is when you start to kind of unpack that and talk about, that resource allocation, the cost, the long-term impact of that on an organization, it becomes a little bit easier to say, let's take a look at, let's start with the most critical things. Where are we struggling? Where can we eliminate waste? Where can we make things more efficient? Where can we have an impact, internally at those kind of high value touch points? And then again, obviously, if there's things that impact from customer standpoint externally, let's start there as well. Let's see how we can make that connection and that communication more seamless for them, and kind of go from there. So that's where I would land, all about process, and make sure that you've got a great understanding of that before you start to tackle any type of automation or document management, because you could potentially just be duplicating, to your point, and duplicating a warehouse full of paper just in the cloud.
Exactly. Super cloud, right? Super cloudy warehouse. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. Mark, comments over comment stories. Over to you, Mark.
Sure. So actually, what Chris said and you kind of supplemented, it really made me laugh. So Chris, the story about the incoming EDI invoices where they wanted to create an actual document, and Sam, your comment about the warehouse of documents, it really struck a chord with me, because we listen, I think we have to recognize that there's a whole generation of people in the workplace who grew up with paper, and paper was comfort. I mean, originally I was one of them, for sure. So sometimes there's definitely a psychological barrier that you need to somehow break down around digitizing documents and digitizing document-centric processes. And like one of the examples that we found from time to time is yeah, you put a new ERP system in a company, and you've digitized the invoicing process. So all the invoices go out either via EDI or automatically emailed PDFs, whatever, it doesn't really matter. There's no longer a paper invoice that you print, put in an envelope, and mail out. Amazing how many people are so uncomfortable with that. So they'll still insist on printing a file copy or 2 file copies, so they can still file an alphabetical copy and an invoice numeric sequence copy. And sometimes to get the implementation done, particularly when you're dealing with a smaller company, you just say to them, fine, do that. So, we had a case several years ago now, actually, where this person insisted on printing and filing these file copies. And it was a company that was growing. And they were doing I think when we started, it was only about maybe 120, 130 invoices a month. But it grew up to where they were generating a couple thousand invoices a month. And this person, he was still printing his copies and sticking them in these files and folders and everything. And the owner was getting very exasperated. But the person who was doing this, who was the controller, was his father. So it was a little bit of an awkward situation. So one of my guys went in and spoke to the father and said, listen, I just like to test something with you because I want you to help me test my system. We're trying to test something out. I've got a list of, I want you to give me a list of about 6 invoices, all of them spread out over the last 3 months. So the father brought out this, came up with a list of invoices. And then my guy, whose name was Mike, said, okay, now I want to test whether I can actually find those invoices in the system efficiently. So how about I'll try find them in the system, you go grab them out of the filing cabinets. And of course, you know what happened, right? The father got up, walked over to the filing cabinet. Before he touched the first drawer, Mike said, here they are, all on screen. No more printing of invoices after that. But that's what it took, is basically the amazing race, if you like. So I kind of enjoy that. But one thing I've really noticed on this conversation, we're all singing from the same song sheet, because I think we're all saying, and Sam, this should be music to your ears, the most important thing is to understand, what are your objectives? What are you trying to do? What's your strategy? Define the processes, particularly which processes will give you the best bang for the buck. Figure out how they should work or how they can work more efficiently. And then, the tools, that you'll find the right tools. Hopefully the tools are the tools. But, a lot of people tend to approach document management in general by saying, there's this tool, let's use it, as opposed to, here's a process that we can improve, let's see how we can improve it. So I think, hopefully anyone who's listening to this realizes, we've all got a lot of experience between us, and we're all saying the same thing. Chances are we're probably right.
Yeah, amazing insights here, and thank you so much for that story, Mark. Nirav, comments, any stories?
So I actually just noticed there was a comment there, guys, about roll eyes. What percentage of ERP features were built solely as, roll eyes, if that's what it takes? Yeah, I'm not sure that's a conscious thing, certainly not that I'm aware of. But I'm sure some of those features are capitalized on by good, experienced implementation consultants to say, I'm going to use it that way. I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Okay, Nirav, do you want to go next? And
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any follow-up questions.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Anyone that's listening right now that's looking to embark on an ERP journey, going through ERP selection phase, make this a requirement. Look at how you could take a lot of paper in your organization right now, bring it into your system electronically, whether that's data or if you're doing attachments. Make it part of your project plan. Find out best practices in terms of AP is one right away that you could, that's best practice right now. To get it out of paper and then go ahead and scan it right into your ERP system. What's the next place that you could do that in? Where are some other efficiencies in the production process? What about even, we talked about EDI, customer portal, but, on the EP side, you could scan an AP document. What about on the sales order side? Why not take a customer PO, scan that, and make it into a sales order, right? And store that right away on that side, right? What else, right? If you're doing checks, we talked about checks, system checks. Why can't we go ACH? Right? That's a form of paperless, right? Let's go paperless. Let's have the bank do some of this work for us, right? Keep this part of the forefront in implementation, and then obviously process is important, data is important, right? But this is a place where you could really find quick ROI on your ERP implementation to start getting people more outside of their inbox, outside of checking mail, and more inside the business to help, build the business up and become more efficient, become more lean ultimately. So, what everyone said here, echo definitely in all those sentiments, and, continue looking at, how to get the most value out of your ERP system there.
All right, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Nirav, for that. Chris, so the only thing we can take right now is going to be closing advice.
So again, study your processes and do a good job of thinking about, how to impact the business process efficiency. And coupled with that, you need to make sure you really do visit and articulate document management policies, retention, security, etc.
Yeah.
And like I said, look for the big wins. AP automation is a form of remote process automation. So again, you hands off, the thing comes in, it's integrated, it's sitting there. There's processes that can turn around and select and send your checks out the door. On the AR side, it's like cash coming in and out. So again, as you look at getting documents into electronic forms, you support remote process automation. And what are you doing? You're eliminating headcount. So there's what I'll leave you with. Look for it.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Dave, we have 3 minutes, and we can probably take longer closing advice today.
I'm used to trying to sneak it right in there before the wire. So I think what I'm going to do, instead of talking about process, because we've talked about that long enough today, and Chris just touched on it again, I think I'm going to toss out there something we haven't brought up today, but in terms of how to look at that process through what lens, and that's through the people, right? People that are closest to the process, people that are on either side of the process, and looking at it through their lens to have this conversation about document management, to really understand, at what points, what are those high visibility kind of, hopefully low cost, but high impact points that we can address those process inefficiencies with, but through the lens of people. That's where I'll leave it.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. Mark, closing advice, please.
Well, firstly, I think that Chris and Dave have really nailed it in terms of closing advice, and I think those are probably two of the most important takeaways from this. I'll just add to this that for those people who are daunted by the thought of getting rid of paper or automating processes that they currently do sort of on a more manual basis, the strongest recommendation I have is try it. Try something that's maybe the least threatening thing for you. Try it, because I always find like the fear of the unknown, so in anything, but certainly in implementing new software in a business, the fear of the unknown usually dwarfs the reality. Now, yes, I know we could go in the opposite direction about all the ERP implementation horror stories, but I'm talking about one little particular piece of technology or one little daily habit that you've changed. If you usually like come into the office, hang up your coat, and then grab coffee, try one day, grab the coffee first, and then hang up your coat. It's not that threatening, and it's kind of like that. Try and break that habit of being so married to your existing process by just trying one thing that you can always go back the next day, and you'll find it's less threatening. And if you really love handling paper, the library has lots of books.
Okay, amazing, Mark. Thank you so much. And Nirav, seems like 3 minutes are not as long, so I'm probably looking for now brief closing advice.
Yeah, no, kind of touching, piggybacking off what Mark said. If you're confused on where to start, look at your desk. There's paper there. There's probably something that you could put into your system. The answer is right there. So look down, see what you could put into your ERP system now, right? And how you could, take that data off your desk and more electronically, right there in front of your screen.
All right, love it. Thank you so much, guys. And that's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our digital transformation series, for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys are going to be here next week. We're going to come back with another topic. On that note, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight.
Thanks, everybody. See you again.
Take care.